Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 31. Today I'm joined by Steve Bartylla. Steve is an accomplished outdoor writer and whitetail consultant and is sharing strategies for all things deer hunting to help you tip the odds in your favor this season. So tune in. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and today we have another great guest. We got a hot show. Hot show. That's what Jimmy Fallon always says. I always wanted to say that. I don't make Jimmy Fallon money, but we can still say hot show, I think. John, you down with the hot show?
I like it, man. Whatever works, right?
Yeah, hot show today. We have on Steve Bartylla. I'm sure, with all of you folks out there, he doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. Steve is, plainly put, he's kind of the man. He's been in the industry for a long time. He's written a bunch of books. He's on Deer and Deer Hunting TV. He writes for Deer and Deer Hunting magazine. He actually just wrote a great feature article in the most recent Deer and Deer Hunting magazine, kind of talking about property lines and how one should treat thy neighbor, maybe is a good way to put it. But Steve's great. He obviously has a bunch of knowledge when it comes to habitat management and consulting and whitetail consulting. So the conversation with him is going to be awesome, as just about anything that he does is. And we're looking forward to that conversation. But before we dive into that, as always, joined by my brother from another mother, John Mulligan. How you doing, man?
Hey, what's happening, brother?
Hanging in there, man. Just trying to grind through another week. We are, I don't know, I saw a post the other day. What are we, like 74 days out from the beginning of whitetail season? Does that sound right? Roughly?
Yeah, I guess let's see. Well, I've actually got Missouri. Ooh. Whitetail's September 15th. So I've got just another 36 days, something like that.
Nice. That's, yeah, that's pretty exciting, dude. I try to hold myself off on getting all the tingly feels too early in the hunting season. But this is the time of the year where I catch myself daydreaming all day at work. Can't concentrate. I go to bed thinking about what wind am I going to get this time of year for this stand, and how am I going to access these stands? One would think you would work this stuff out way in advance, but I'm a little late to the party with some of that stuff. But I'm finally kind of ramped up and ready to go, which, I have a Western hunt before that. And you'd think I'd be I'm super pumped to go West, but I don't know what to expect with that trip. So I don't have any frame of reference. So I'm still all geeked out on whitetail right now.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because, right after Missouri, a week later, then I'll be heading out to Montana as well. And at least I have been out there before for antelope, and it's not like I have to worry about the backcountry, the hiking in, and tents and that kind of stuff. I mean, for the most part, I think we're going to just throw sleeping bags in the back of the truck. Nice. And just kind of truck camp on the side of the road. So nice. It's not going to be too terribly bad. But every year, like people listening, you go through these steps and you're like, I'm going to be more prepared for this season than I was last season. And before you know it, the season's here and you're like, holy crap, I'm caught with my pants down again,
Yeah, exactly.
It happens.
Yeah, I think I'm at the point where I just might not even have pants anymore is kind of how I feel. Like, I think those
correct. Yeah.
It's,
oh yeah, my shoes are off. Yeah, shoes are off, no socks.
Yeah. I got my feet are up.
I'm rocking from the waist down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm kind of in that same boat. I got a lot of stuff done this year. I think my biggest Achilles heel this year was most of the work that I needed to do was going to be late summerish, because all the years that I've had most of the work where I needed to do in the spring, where it was putting in spring food plots and stuff like that, I knocked that stuff out pretty quick. But this year, all the food plotting and stuff that I'm doing is all, for either fall or winter food. And so, I've been prepping plots recently, and then of course add on the added work of, I mentioned to you, before we started recording that, my wife and I picked up a house, and that's getting ready to, wrap up or close here in like 2 weeks. So it's like I'm getting ready to move and into a new place and all that fun stuff that comes along with it. So it's just kind of like a nice kind of smashing together of like, getting ready to leave for 2 weeks right after we move in for an elk hunt in Montana, and then all the whitetail stuff that has to finish up. Plus, oh, by the way, why don't you move into a new house right before you leave for Montana? And then, oh, by the way, when you get back, whitetail season's here, so now you're gone for like the next 2 months. So
right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No. And I mean, why not do that? Why not just complicate matters? Yeah. And she's gonna love you too, because you better get out of cardboard boxes in the first 2 weeks, because if you leave her to do all that by herself, you might just want to stay in Montana.
Yeah, exactly, dude. The contractor's already been contacted for a new kitchen floor, so that's already happened. So they'll do that before we even get in there. So I'm doing a couple things, checking a couple boxes to make nice. What doesn't help?
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not terrible. Yeah, I do think of others sometimes. Yeah. The kicker is though, is when we moved from Florida to here, the week that we moved in, I actually had 2 weeks before we moved in, I actually had surgery, and I couldn't lift anything, so I couldn't help move anything. I basically was the white hat foreman, just walking around pointing where people should take stuff. And
you were the general contractor of the moving operations and whatnot.
I totally was. So, and now this one, it's we're going to move in, and then I'm going to be like, hey, I know there's a bunch of boxes laying around still, but I got to go to Montana for 2 weeks. I'll be back. Yeah. So I might need to stop by your place on the way home and cool off for maybe a week or two to let things simmer before I get home. So,
yeah, man. Yeah. Doors are always open. I say that literally because I don't even have a key to the front door. So, the door's always open, literally.
Oh, man.
Wait, no, I just said that publicly. No, I always lock my doors with alarms and everything.
Right. Well, hey, being Johnny Law, it's I would be afraid to come through the open door potentially. I have a feeling you're pretty accurate when it comes to a handpiece. If I'm not mistaken.
I've been known to shoot a handgun pretty decent.
Yeah.
No, it's funny because I remember whenever we moved out here last year, we left the closing and we came to the house, and of course, there's other things that are on your mind. I'm living in a totally different state, and there's just all these changes. And I get home, and we got ready to leave to go get something to eat. My wife's like, "Hey, did you lock the front door?" I said, "I don't think I have a key to the front door." So I called the previous owner, and I said, "Hey, I apologize, but I didn't get a key to the front door." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't have one." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Dude, it's Iowa. There's only 180 people that live in the town. Like, nobody even knows the house is on the top of that hill anyways. Just, you don't have to worry about anything," which is very odd. Like you mentioned, with my background, man, I'm hitting the alarm on my truck 5 times as I walk away in a parking lot at a gas station or a grocery store and everything else. So it's taken some getting used to.
Yeah, when I go back home, super small town in central PA, and I stop at a store somewhere and I go to walk in, and I'm walking in just like to the whatever service station. I'm like, maybe I stopped and got gas, or I stopped and got a bottle of water or whatever. And I'm walking in. It's one of those small ones where when you walk in, like you're still only maybe like 15 feet from your truck. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's right on, the parking's right on top of the glass door to walk in the front door. And I'll walk in and I'll literally do the same thing. I'll hit my alarm like 3 times, and like everyone in the whole place or everyone getting gas kind of looks and be like, out of towner. It's clear sign that I'm new guy there.
Well, that's hilarious. The first I'd been here maybe 2 or 3 months, and I went to go look at a piece of property down the road. A farmer had invited me over, and as a possible place that I might want to hunt. And I pulled up to the house, and I got out, and he's like, "Well, hey, jump in my truck and we'll ride to the back of the farm." And as I'm walking away from my Tacoma, I do the whole beep beep.
Right.
And he's like, "What'd you do?" He's like, "What was that?" I was like, "What was what?" And he goes, "You locked your doors?" And I went, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, you're not from around here, are you?" I'm like, "Look, I'm not saying where I grew up before was straight hood, but like, it is what it is,
Right.
I don't want to be a victim.
Right. Exactly. It's, living just outside of Philadelphia, it's, there's some places you park your car, you may not have hubcaps, or tires for that matter. You'll be thankful that your car is still there.
Cinder blocks.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. It's like I rode the train for work for 5 years through that place, and it's there's some what I'll call sporty areas of town,
That's right.
And whenever you're in the burbs, you're not usually ever too far away from those. You know what I mean? It's like people ask how close I live to the city, and I'm like, for me, it's like I live a world away, because it's nothing like the city where I live out in the suburbs, but it's still only 14 miles to downtown. And I say that to people back home, and they're like, man, it's like living in the city. And I'm like, it's 16 miles, but it takes an hour and 45 minutes to drive there. I'm like, so it's like,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
yeah. No, it's for me. I've got about 5 miles of gravel before I make it to asphalt, and then it's about 25 minutes of asphalt before I make it to a grocery store.
I'm currently jealous,
but still, you never know. Farmer Fred down the road, he might have not had a good crop season this year. He might want to come inside and take my couch or something. I don't know. Like I'm just still not used to it. Like to me, you lock the doors on your vehicle and you lock the doors on your house,
Oh yeah. I've got
granted the bank still owns a lot of that stuff. I'm just making payments on it, but still
right.
It's my stuff,
Right, exactly.
And someday I'll own it.
Yeah, I'm the obsessive compulsive guy that I have to check like the stove, the lights, and the doorknob like 10 times before I leave the house to make sure I got it all.
Yeah,
it drives my wife nuts. Before we go anywhere, I'll get out to the car. I'll literally get in the car, sit in the driver's seat, turn the car on, and be like, I gotta go check the front door. I can't remember if I locked it or not.
We're gonna see you on one of those television shows. You remember that? Like there was like a show about OCD.
Oh yeah.
And I feel sorry for those people. Like that sounds like absolute torture. They go to lock the door and they lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock, unlock. They do it like a series of 7 times, and then they walk away. And if it's not 7, then they just can't function the rest of the day.
Yeah.
That would be horrible.
It's funny. My number's 7.
Like I couldn't imagine.
The number 7. That's it. My favorite number.
Is it? Is 7 your number?
7 is my number. No, man. It's like, I'm not quite that bad. It's see, mine is like, I can't decide if it's, if I have like some kind of obsessive compulsive disorder, or if it's just like really poor memory from all the years of rock and roll. I'm not quite sure. I haven't quite figured that out.
So how much of a rocker were you? Are you sure it's memory issues or what?
It's that, or...
We know how you rocker the lifestyle.
Oh, yeah.
Groupies and
it was
all
wild.
That craziness and shenanigans.
It was wild. That's why I'm so slow now. I'm like, man, I'm wore out. Still wore out. It's been 10 years. I'm still wore out.
The rock and roll lifestyle, man, it chewed you up and spit you out.
It does, man.
Just a washed up hunter from PA now.
That's right. You hit the nail on the head, dude. It's either that, or I remember the one time I went to the doctor for, I don't remember what it was for, but I went, I think it was, I get a vertigo probably like twice a year. And sometimes for different reasons. My ears are kind of messed up from wrestling. I was slammed once and kind of messed up some stuff in my ears. And of course, all the years of loud music doesn't help a whole lot either. And, I went into the doctor and I was like, I'm having vertigo, and I was trying to figure out what's going on. And he was like, have you ever had head trauma in your life? And I was like, yeah. I was like, absolutely. He's like, well, how many? He's like, have you ever had a concussion? I was like, well, yeah. I'm like, kind of like, duh. It's like I had 2 last year. It's like, and he's like, well, how many times do you think you've had head trauma? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, I can count at least 10 concussions that I've had, between like skateboarding, snowboarding, football, wrestling. I mean, I got 2-on-1 on a slip and slide. You know what I mean? So,
dang, start calling you Crash Campbell.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah. So now when I see all these things about CTE and football, I'm like, man, do I have like a brain injury? And the doctor looked at me. He was like, man, someone with that amount of head trauma. He's like, have you ever had like a head scan or something? And I said, nope. And he basically looked at me like I had 3 heads. And so I didn't ask any further questions. I said, thank you for my checkup, sir. I will talk to you later.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's funny. It's, I shouldn't open with saying it's funny. No, it is sad. There's a lot of football players that, they've had some nasty concussions, and it sounds, there's been a lot of advances in the helmets and stuff like that to keep an eye on that kind of stuff. But yeah, that stuff's got some long-term effects for sure.
Yeah, it sure does, man. I remember the one time I got hit so hard, everything went to black. It's like, I'm not a big guy, and coach is like, we need a fullback, and I'm just one of those guys where it's like, contact, I'm in, so put me, and I'm like the smallest dude on the team. It's a dive,
sure.
Whatever the play call was to the 2-hole. I was the lead blocker. I met our starting linebacker head on in the hole, and I woke up with him picking me up. And that was then,
is this heaven?
Yeah, it was. that was it. My practice was over at that point. That was the one thing. Like, they did take my helmet that day, and they were like, "Yeah, you should go sit down now." Like, yeah, and so I did. But
right.
Speaking of, this is a deer hunting podcast, not to get off on a bunch of house buying, domesticated, head trauma, going to the doctor stories here. But
yeah,
so
we've
we
gone
should
from moving trucks to groupies to concussions, and
yeah.
I don't know how that all fits together.
Well, the concussion is how I explain all the stuff that I did. That's my reasoning.
That's right.
It's full circle. you just helped me create my alibi. I appreciate it. It's good stuff.
That's right. That's right.
Teamwork.
If there's any insurance companies listening, this is not fake. This is real.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but speaking of deer work, man, have you done any card pulls since we last talked?
No. I'm actually due to do a card pull. Well, I take that back. I did do a card pull down in Missouri, and I'm going to do a card pull this weekend here in Iowa. Card pull in Missouri was very interesting. I expected, and again, this, to pretend that we know what we're talking about all the time with deer hunting, you still, you learn something new. I hung some cameras and I had them soaking in a spot that I was pretty confident that I was going to get a lot more last light pictures.
Right.
And I'm actually getting more morning buck pictures than I'm getting evening buck pictures, but I am getting them in daylight, like that 8:30 a.m. Central Time kind of window. So it's interesting, predominantly early season. I don't like to hunt mornings. Right. I like to hunt evenings, but if I'm getting buck pictures in the mornings, I may have to move some cameras around to make sure that I can sneak in the morning, because they might be feeding really, really close. Right. And they might be in those bean fields where my tree stand is. So I'm going to have to move some cameras around here real fast and see if I can pinpoint where they're at, and if it's something I can take a chance on sneaking in the morning. So that was, it's another piece of evidence. It's not really what I wanted, the evidence I wanted, but it's I'll take it nonetheless. But
right.
Yeah, I'm going to pull some cards here in Iowa and see what I've got. So far, the biggest buck that I've seen, I almost hit the other night on the road on my way home from the gym at like 10:30 at night or 11 o'clock at night. Man. And I was talking to one of my buddies over he lives over in West Virginia, my buddy Jeremy, and we're on the phone, and all of a sudden I stopped talking mid-sentence and I go, holy crap. And he's like, what, dude, what, are you okay? Like, what happened? I think he thought I ran off the road, and I probably almost did, but
right.
I saw a legitimate 170, 175 buck,
nice.
10 yards in front of my truck. So that was cool. It's only a half mile from one of my hunting properties. But I haven't gotten a trail camera picture of him yet.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, first off, I'm glad you didn't hit him for a couple of reasons. Glad you didn't crash your truck, but two, that he's still still around, secondarily, that he's still around. That's cool that he's close to your house. Maybe you'll have an opportunity at him. I hope he's on some of your cameras when you pull the cards. Yeah,
he's a beauty. Just a real clean 10, super, super tall. I mean, I'm talking like, 14, 15 inch G2s. Wow. Just something very, very special, very noticeable, kind of tight, just really, really tall and big, long main beams. And yeah, he would definitely be what I would call L shooter for sure.
L shooter.
Yes.
Yeah. I did some work at my dad's place, checked a couple cameras, and I had him out soaking for, I don't know, it was probably pretty close to a month and a half, almost 2 months, I think.
A long time.
Yeah. So I mean, I got to see him kind of, whatever was on camera develop. His property, of course, is kind of new, so didn't know a whole lot about it. Do have one nice shooter for Pennsylvania. It's not a 170-inch deer, but he's got a couple nice PA 8-points running around. Fun. I was kind of anticipating I was going to get a lot of nighttime pictures. I don't know why. I just kind of thought that area would be a lot of nighttime pictures because it's kind of far away from any crop fields. So there's not a lot of, cornfields. It's a bit of a hike. So I assumed that if they were bedding nearby, that I wouldn't get them coming back until late in the evening, or very early in the morning, if they're bedding on our property at all. But oddly enough, it's like there's this one fence row that, I assume someone who owned it years ago, and I mentioned this on one of the previous podcasts, we talked about it, but there's page wire fence all over the place because I think someone had cattle in there at some point. And so it's old as dirt, so a lot of it's fallen down on places, but as you know, it's like the deer, if they started using that fence line to travel at any point, like they'll continue to use it. Even they did studies where they put a fence line in, the deer traveled it, they removed the fence line, and deer continued to travel that same path even with the fence line gone now.
Yep.
So I just kind of thought, I was like, well, they're probably using this fence line. I'll hang a camera here. And sure enough, I have deer coming through there every morning like clockwork between like 6:30 and 8:30. And then the one nice 8-point, for PA, he's kind of a bruiser 8. He's showing up there during daylight hours a couple different times. So I think I have an idea where I think he's bedding. So that will probably be my early season hunt. And I'm kind of on the fence the same as you, where it's like I typically don't like to hunt mornings early season, but he's kind of telling me that I should be. So I'll continue to monitor. I mean, it's a long way. I know Missouri's season comes in a little earlier, but PA, it's kind of, I think, the same as Iowa. It's a long ways off for opening, where it's beginning of October, and a lot could change between now and then. So we'll just kind of keep watch and see what happens. But
yeah. This weekend when I do a card pull, I'm actually going to move a couple of my cameras, and I'm actually going to start a couple of mock scrapes this weekend.
Nice.
And it's I'm a big fan of mock scrapes. People talk about, well, I'll throw a pile of corn out and that'll tell me my inventory, or I'll do a mineral site and that'll tell me my inventory. I can tell you, with scrapes, you don't get a bunch of pictures of does,
right,
on your corn sites, and you don't get a bunch of pictures of does on your mineral sites. So you get some higher quality images nonetheless. But yeah, I started doing mock scrapes 2 years ago. I started doing them a little bit earlier, and one advantage that I feel like I have, kind of my ace up my sleeve, is my really good friend Sam Calora, from Mrs. Dopey and the infamous Calora buck
right,
that he killed years ago. But Sam, he has a general statement that, and I've heard him give it to hundreds of people, if not thousands, and he'll say, you could do mock scrapes during the season, during the rut, and you can be one doe out of 1,000 does that are out there in heat.
Right.
Or you can start your mock scrapes early and you can be the first doe.
Right.
And so it makes a lot of sense. And I guess the biology side of it is that, a deer, as soon as a deer sheds velvet, physically he is able to produce,
right,
without going vulgar. He's
right,
ready to rock. We'll put it that way.
He's locked and loaded.
Yes. The gun is now officially loaded. It's even cocked.
Right.
No pun intended. But so that's the other thing. And of course, the rut is nowhere near in yet.
Yeah.
But he's ready. So that's one thing I really do like about mock scrapes. And yes, most mock scrape activity or scrape activity does happen in the evenings. But again, if I know where a deer is at any point in the 24-hour window, I mean, that is a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
So
yeah,
I'll take sightings whenever I can get them, no matter what time it is. If there's a trail camera that'll tell me a direction that he came from or a direction he was moving to. Again, they're all pieces of the puzzle, you know?
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately for me, it's like I've done mock scrapes in the past, with what I'll call variable success. So some have worked, some haven't. And then just a few years ago, I started using some preorbital for licking branches, preorbital gland.
Sure.
And that seemed to do pretty well, but early, and then for whatever reason, it just I would start to, like, bucks would stop showing up to those. Like, they would hit it like once or twice as soon as it was something different in the woods, and then after that, like, they would pretty much, it was as though it didn't exist. And so I kind of backed off that. And unfortunately for me now, it's like the area in PA that all the properties I hunt are all in a CWD management zone. So there's, restricted, no mineral sites, no using any type of lures or anything like that. So for me this year, it's a non-option. But I know that, with Steve coming up here, I know that he's done some stuff with scrapes, and even going as far as making scrape trees, out in food plots to kind of get you an opportunity get you an optimum shot opportunity if there's a buck that's frequenting a food plot, or, one that's in the area, and get him to try to, come out and kind of tip the odds in the shooter's favor. And if there's not what I'll call a tree in the area to produce like a good licking branch with a good shot opportunity, he just kind of makes one, which is kind of an interesting approach. Yep. I've never done that. I'd like to try it sometime if we ever get out of the CWD zone where I can do some of that stuff. It's like, I'd love to give it a try. But with that, man, I think maybe we should just go ahead and get the expert dialed in and see what Steve has to say about all things whitetail, and get some tips from him. Yeah,
sounds like a plan, dude.
All right, let's do it. Before we dial Steve in, let's take a quick second to pause to talk about our partners at Exodus Outdoor Gear. You've all probably heard me talk about the Exodus 5-year no BS warranty, which is absolutely industry leading. And since the launch of their new Lift 2 camera, I've actually had a chance to put the new camera into the timber and see how it performs. Trigger speed is awesome. Sensitivity is great. I'm not getting the tail end of a deer or a bunch of false triggers. The thing I think I'm most impressed with, though, is with the video. We're talking top-notch video camera quality videos here, and I've always shied away from using video on other cameras due to battery consumption, but I've had these cameras in the timber on video mode for about 2 months, and still better than 80% battery life remaining. What's better than an Exodus camera? Nothing, except saving money when you purchase an Exodus camera. How do you do that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Use the promo code TRUTH at checkout at ExodusOutdoorGear.com and save $20 on a camera today. And now let's get back to the show. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and today my guest needs probably very little introduction to most of you, as he is well known and very renowned throughout the whitetail circles in the United States. I am joined by the one and only Steve Bartylla, who is, of course, of deer and deer hunting, has written a litany of books, and if there's a deer hunting magazine out there at some point in his career, he has likely touched it and has influenced it in some way, shape, or form. So without further ado, how are you doing this morning, Steve?
I virtually rendered speechless. I should have hired you back when I did seminars to have you introduce me, because whoa, I've never gotten an introduction quite like that before. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm not doing too bad. Had my morning cup of coffee, and just kind of getting things rolling. The body these days, as I get older, doesn't limber up as quickly as it used to. So,
buddy, I just got done 4 days out in the woods, and just digging 8 2.5-foot holes to plant scrape trees in.
Yeah,
you don't have to tell me right now about getting holes.
Right, I hear you. I had some deer work this weekend. Funny story about digging holes is my dad, as part of punishment whenever I was a kid growing up, used to make me dig holes because he was going to plant trees, and then after I get them all dug in the evening and finished up, he would come back and say, "Yeah, I decided not to plant any trees. Go ahead and fill those back in." So, so that
would be a lot funnier from his end than it would be from yours, I'm sure.
Yeah, I can appreciate the humor now, but those days I didn't find the humor whenever I was 15, 16 years old, shall we say. But as I had mentioned, you've done a lot in the whitetail world, and have had a very long career that I think most people would be envious of, is in terms of what you've been able to do, and how you've been able to kind of influence the way people approach hunting in the books you've been able to write. But for those who might not be as familiar, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you started in hunting and what you do specifically in the whitetail world.
That's about a 3-hour conversation. And I never know how to explain it. I got started doing this out of ignorance and stubbornness. I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to be able to, and how difficult it was to break in. And I actually started making videos. I made a couple how-to videos. It really frustrated me that the only videos out there that consistently taught me anything were Barry Wenzel's videos, like Hunting October Whitetails, Tips and Tricks, Hunting October Whitetails 2, and all that type of stuff. And it was just when people were starting to put together the shoot 'em up videos. Only back then a shoot 'em up video contained 2-3 deer getting shot.
Right.
So I did that, and I started actually trying to write just to not sell the videos, but build a little bit of name recognition, because who the heck's going to buy a video from somebody they've never heard of before? And so I went for the big boys and just kept getting rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter. From deer and deer hunting alone, I know I got the exact same form rejection letter at least 10 times. And then the same month, Bob Torres was the editor of Bow and Arrow Hunting magazine, an ex-Marine who knew nothing about bow hunting, which I'm quite certain that's why he decided he'd take one of my articles. And Gordon Whittington from North American Whitetail. I must have been just a sympathy deal there. I have no idea, but both of them ended up buying articles the same month. Which one was the first? I can't even remember anymore, but just kind of went from there. And at the same time, I'm giving seminars at deer shows. And the whole reason I'm giving seminars is, again, just build a little bit of name recognition. So maybe somebody will buy some of my videos. And I split the seminars 50-50 between hunting and habitat improvement. And on the habitat improvement, back then, wow, you gave a seminar on habitat improvement, you draw, at least I did, 3-to-1 over hunting, because habitat improvement. This was, we're talking 25 years ago now. The idea of food plots and improving the habitat for deer was just bizarre concept. Right. And after I'd get done with them, there'd always be 4 or 5 people hanging around with more questions, and half of them would be outfitters and ask me if I'd be willing to help them on their property. So I started consulting on the habitat improvement and hunting end of things, and everything just kind of grew from there. Wow,
it's kind of funny how people take a path to get to where they ultimately end up. It usually ends up being the you couldn't have planned it if you tried, I guess, type of thing. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You just kind of go at things with the best possible, lay the foundation that you know you can lay, and do what you can do, and hopefully people enjoy it or like it, or you're helping them and they see value in it, and then from there, it's about building the relationships probably at that point.
Oh man, it's without a doubt. Excuse me. The whole reason that I finally started writing for Deer and Deer Hunting is I ran into, back then the editor was Pat Durkin. Excuse me for just 1 second. Mm-hmm. The editor was Pat Durkin, and I was giving seminars at the Madison Deer and Turkey Expo, which, if any of your listeners are in that area and haven't went, I don't speak there anymore. I retired from speaking about 5 years ago now. But I'll tell you what, it's for the Midwest, it's a heck of a show. I mean, I think it's the best. Personally, I think it's the best in the entire Midwest. But anyway, I was giving seminars there. I ran into Pat, and he asked, well, why haven't you ever tried writing for me? Like, Pat, I don't even know how many rejection letters I've got from you. And he made up a bit of a BS story about how that's not him, that's his associate editor. Write personal on the letter. This shows how long ago this was. You actually had to, sit down and type out all these article ideas and slap it in an envelope and mail it to Deer Hunt. And write personal on it. And that way, it'll actually get to me, not my associate editor, which, as I said, was complete baloney. Right. But I've been writing for him ever since. Simply, life in general is a good old boys network.
Yeah.
Whether for good, bad, ugly, that's reality. The hunting world is a good old boys network on steroids.
Right.
I'm not saying that you don't have to have any skill at all.
Right.
You nailed it when you said it's about knowing the right people. You know the right people, and they like you. Opportunities avail themselves to you.
Yeah, it's
doesn't matter how good you are. You don't know the right people, you aren't getting anywhere.
Right, and then you have to make sure to maintain those relationships. And I've always had the motto: it's that prior to what I do now for a living, which is marketing and advertising and things of that nature. I was a musician, and I always had the saying that the same people that if you choose to kick on your way up as you climb the ladder, you're going to see on your way back down, because it's inevitable. At some point, you're going to slide. And so you just hope that you've treated people right on your way up, to where there's some type of safety net in place if and when you do hit a rough patch.
I wasn't ever smart enough to look at it that way, but I couldn't possibly agree more. This industry is exceptionally small.
Mm-hmm.
I was helping River's Edge tree stands years ago, and their marketing guy, 10 years later, is the marketing guy for Faradyne, which is a company that owns every dang archery product in the world now, it seems.
Right.
Black, Ray, just on and on and on. I'm glad I was real nice to them back when I was specifically helping them.
Right.
I mean, life's hard enough with friends. You go around making a bunch of enemies, especially in this industry, and it's not going to be good.
Right, exactly. And we've had some recent mishaps here, and we can touch on those if we would like here in the past week or so. Folks doing things not the right way, which are going to hurt them tremendously going forward. I have a feeling, but I do want to shift. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I said they're done.
Yeah. It's that's something you don't come back from, but
no.
I do want to shift gears here and talk a little bit about what you had mentioned with the habitat consulting component of the area of your expertise, and why I wanted to kind of dive into kind of some things that you do, I guess, that you do specifically when you're looking at managing properties. And the first part is I wanted to ask you, given the time of year that we're in, let me ask it this way. At this point, in terms of habitat management and updates or enhancements, what types of things are you doing at this portion of the season?
Well, as we were discussing right before we hit record here, I just got back from a 4-day trip to a client's property. Out there, what I was doing is inspecting everything.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, look at everything. Figured now's is anytime from the time season's done till about now. You'd really like to go out and inspect your property a couple times. Once right after season, once when things start greening up in the spring, and once midsummer. All these improvements you make. So you go in and you do some hinge cutting to create a doe bedding area. That's good and great, but it's not like there's nothing to do there ever again for the next 20 years. You have to do at times, some of the trees don't live and they fall, and that can go ahead and mess everything. For your listeners that may not be familiar with hinge cutting is doing nothing but cutting from the back side of the lean, through the tree until the tree tips over, retaining that connection with the root system. The cut there, the remaining tissue, ends up creating a hinge, hence the term hinge cutting. Well, that's a great trick on certain species to really jack up the browse levels, because those species, a good percent of them, will continue to live. Okay? So now you have that canopy down on the forest floor, and all that extra browse and cover. It's a really, really, really quick way of transforming a small area in the woods. You don't want to go through your entire woods hinge cutting; that'd be ridiculous. But pocket, it's a great little tool. But yet, as I said, those things require maintenance over time. They eventually can go to heck on you. So I was inspecting the food plots, looking at the various, I don't know, for lack of a better term, buck traps I set up with some habitat improvements, making sure that it's working as intended, and killing my shoulders by planting 8 scrape trees. And of course, and when I'm planting, what I mean by planting scrape trees is I'll go ahead and cut a tree that, when buried 2.5 to 3 feet in the ground, will have a licking branch right at nose level. So I mean, this is not a live tree, obviously. Right. It was until I cut it, but right. It's just a way of so you've got your tree stand. You're sitting on a fresh clear cut. You're sitting on a big meadow. You're sitting on a soybean field, an alfalfa field, a pick corn field, any large food source that's too large to cover with your weapon. You go ahead and put that scrape tree 20 yards out in front of your stand, right in the middle of that food source. It sticks out like a sore thumb. It ends up a tray, and scrapes are nothing more than the whitetail's equivalent to human billboards. They're meant to advertise. Well, geez, where do you see billboards? Places where they're going to stand out. You put that scrape tree out in that food plot, and is every buck going to come over and check it out? No. But an extra, 10, 20%, they're going to be standing 20 yards in front of your stand. Well, if you point those licking branches back towards the stand, in order to work that scrape, they have to give you a good shot angle, and they're taking their attention and placing it directly away from you, giving you all day up in the stand to come to full draw and make the shot. So I buried 8 of those, did a bunch of inspection, and put out cameras. That's what this time of year is about, figuring out what you're gonna do for fall food plots, where, and I know a lot of people this time of year get out there and do a bunch of scouting. There really isn't a worse time of the year to scout.
Right.
It is fun, and I do it myself a lot. I've done it a ton. It is fun to sit there and observe deer this time of year, but with what's going on, there's going to be a big time shuffle here as soon as those bachelor groups start breaking up here in a couple months. Well, actually, it's in about a month from now.
Yeah. So you mentioned those scrape trees, and I'm curious, what kind of success? Because I've never used one, and I've contemplated putting one in. What type of success rate do you have with those? Just because my novice understanding is that a lot of the scrapes that are checked or made are usually done under the cover of dark.
Sure.
And so I was always just curious of what the success rate is during using those, and what you could expect.
Well, it really. To answer the question, I get it, but really to answer the question, the first thing you have to define is, what do you mean by success?
Yeah, true.
Success to me, the clearest cut example of success to me is the very first time I ever did one, and I'm sitting there hunting this field that's got a little island of trees out in it, and I'm thinking to myself, every buck, it's not even trees, they're brush, but every buck that comes out is headed straight for that island to work scrapes. And it's like, man, there's no way to set up on it because it's so small. I mean, it was like by island, just a little pocket about twice the size of a kitchen table. So it's like, man, if I could just move that, well, maybe a person could go ahead and plant trees specifically do that. Oh man, But you sit there and you plant a tree, and for it to get big, I mean, you're talking years.
Right.
So I thought of a study John Azoga did. John J. Azoga was a research biologist for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. He ran a 1 square mile enclosure in the UP of Michigan where they did all sorts of testing. And he did tests on trying to get deer to, work scrapes and rubs. The scrapes, he was just bending down branches. For the rubs, he was cutting aspen poles and burying them in the ground. So why can't I do that with a scrape tree? Why can't I cut a tree and plant it in the ground just like John's doing for rubbing, only I'm going to do it for scraping? So the next day, when I headed back extra early, found a tree I thought would work, cut it off, went out 20 yards in front of my stand between the island and my stand, and went ahead, buried the tree, pointed the licking branch back to me, and every deer that came out, the first thing they did is come over there to check. It was curiosity.
Right.
Then the young bucks started working it. And then the buck that I was hunting up there that I'd saw 4 sits in a row that eluded me every time, he came up and he made a beeline straight for it, and I shot him. That is, if that's your definition of success, not that much at all.
Right.
Your percent is going to be exceptionally low. What I'm looking for is, as I said, I'm looking for just to suck that deer over to this location. Now, I'm actually hunting a specific age class of deer. It varies depending on where I am. So on the age classes I'm talking about, an honest, fair representation is during hunting season, if he steps out into this opening, 10 to 15% of the time, maybe even up as high as 20, he's going to come over there and check that scrape.
Right. Yeah.
If you don't mind, I don't mean to interrupt you there, but there's one more thing that I do think is pretty key to understanding everything I do. My entire approach is nothing I do is going to change the world. No one act is going to change the deer world. No one act is going to change the deer habitat. No one act is going to change my deer hunting success. It's all about addressing as many little things as I can, stacking as many odds in my favor. So that scrape tree, that doesn't, 10 to 20% is a pretty significant jump.
Yeah, of course.
It's shot opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's go ahead and edge feather that. If you own the property, let's edge feather around that large food source. And edge feathering is just going ahead and hinge cutting a band of about 5 yards wide, the trees and brush around that food. And you don't have to do everything. I mean, obviously you don't be doing this to your big oaks or certainly not your walnuts and stuff like that, but low timber value trees.
Right.
Doing that, it goes ahead and creates a screen between that food source and the woods. So now, if that buck wants to see if there is a doe or buck he's in competition with out in that food source, he's got to go into the food source. He can't actually stand 10 yards back in the woods and say, there's nothing out there, I can keep going. What percent does that knock it up? Maybe 5%?
Right.
That help? And then, those edges regrow so lush, and that's a big part. Another big part of the reason you do something like that is now you've opened up that little 5-yard band forest floor to a little bit more sunlight. You've knocked out that band's canopy, so you get a bunch more growth. And as I said, you do that hinge cutting, all those tops are now down at the bottom. It creates a smorgasbord salad bar in the snap of a finger, which thickens up. So you can go ahead and cut trails through this. That the deer, can the deer slip through other places? Of course they can, but this is easy. So let's do this in a safe wind direction from our stand within shooting range. Does that change the world? No. But it goes ahead and ups it now another couple more percent. And then, you know what, you really want to juice up this food source a little bit more, let's go ahead and get a 20-gallon water trough and bury it all within shooting distance of the stand in a spot that a safe wind area as well. So now, again, is every deer that's going to come over there want to come over here and have a drink of water? No. Well, let's say 5% do. Start adding all that up, and now we do have a big deal.
Right.
And that's my entire, whether it's habitat improvement or hunting.
It's funny because
a foundation is just simply addressing the little details I can to stack the odds in my favor or in my client's favor.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because right before you mentioned that, I wrote down tipping the odds, because all the videos and the writings that I've either watched or read of yours, that was kind of a constant theme, was that just kind of stacking the odds ever so slightly with each individual little enhancement or update. So you would kind of take that approach for every stand location, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Oh, without a doubt. We are, as hunters, generally we are great. We are fantastic when it comes to tearing apart the woods and finding that one spot that we believe that Mr. Big could possibly walk by during legal shooting hours. Where we drop the ball, or we tend to drop the ball, is we put up the stand, we walk away, we're done. Like, well, wait a minute. There's almost always a few little things you can do, even on public ground. I hunt a lot of public ground. Even on public ground, there's almost always a few little things you can do to up the odds even further. You don't have a good tree. That tree, it's a telephone pole, you stick out like a turd in a punch bowl. So go ahead and, if it's private ground, cut some oak branches. Weave it into the outer edge of the platform of the stand. Go ahead and stick it in by the straps or the chain, on the back. Maybe wire some branches up to the tree. Bingo, I got cover. Right. I went from being exposed to the point where I can't move when deer are coming through to now, man, I can darn near do gymnastics up there. There's a trail that you can't, you really need to be covering this trail. You really, really need, this is the one, and this is the spot I have to be, but you're bow hunting and 40 yards up there, a trail breaks off. I can't shoot it. Well, go ahead and, like on public, this is what I was saying about the public ground. On public ground, I'll go ahead and gather as many fallen branches as I can and clog the darn thing. Does that mean that deer can't walk around it? No, it doesn't. Of course they can. But they tend to have one-track minds. And if they look at, I can't get through, they tend to keep going straight instead. When you find that stand, always ask yourself, what can I do to make it better? And be creative. One of the things that I'm going to say right now that I'm fond of saying is our greatest weapon is not my Matthews that I can go ahead and group arrows at 100 yards in the size of a block target. It's not that primitive weapons muzzleloader that can shoot a group the size of a baseball at 250 yards. It's not our rifles. Our greatest weapons are mind. Mm-hmm. We use that. It's our advantage over whitetails. We use that to our fullest. We get creative and we can come up with all sorts of goofy things to do out there.
Right. I wanted to ask you, you talked about hinge cutting there for a moment, and I wanted to get a sense from you, because when people, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but I think a lot of times when folks hinge cutter, they start to create thick areas on their property, they automatically think that that's going to turn into, buck bedding. Bucks like cover, they like thick, nasty, spaces, especially after their velvet comes off and so forth. But when you're doing any type of cutting, are you focusing on creating buck bedding, or are bucks typically going to bed where they like to, regardless of whether you're making a specific area for a buck bed? They're just going to kind of define it themselves, and it's kind of your job to kind of go out and find where they historically want to be and maybe enhance the place that they're really kind of, finding desirable already.
Well, I am exceptionally good at creating buck bedding. I don't think there's a single person in this world. I mean, I hate to come off as an arrogant jerk here, but I don't think there's anybody better than I am at creating buck beds and locations bucks are already bedding. Think about that for a second. He's already bedding there.
Right.
Now, I can go into there and I can go ahead and create a little igloo and get him to crawl underneath it. Oh, heck yes. And is there ever a purpose for something like that? Yeah, there are. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll go ahead and have, historically I've done, I don't know, about 25, 30 plans a year for just photo evaluation plans for
right.
one-time clients. And each year I'll have them create on 25, 30 plans, I'll have, at least 3-4 buck beds for them to make.
Right.
I'm not talking about each client. I'm talking about out of those 20 or 30 clients,
right.
2 to 4. I hate to be this incredibly blunt, but in my humble opinion, buck beds that's a marketing hype.
Right.
You do this and that, and you can get bucks to bed wherever. No, you can't. I can't.
Right.
Well, let's put it that way. If buck bedding is so, especially when you're talking mature bucks, is so based on topography, the amount of pressure, the habitat type. One of the biggest keys, and I just actually just mentioned this the other day to somebody else, one of the biggest keys to taking your game to another level is when you find the sign, don't be content with finding it. Ask why. Why did that buck do this here? What's the odds of him doing it again? Where was he coming from? Where was he going? Is he doing this, and do I think there's a chance he's doing this in daylight, or is this exclusively nocturnal? The more answers we can get when we find sign, the better we can use our most powerful weapon, our brain. And you find that buck bed, you squat down. Now, this is during this time of year, or right after season closes. You don't want to do this stuff during season, but you're out scouting. You find that buck bed on what's called the military crest of the point, right where that point really starts dropping. Squat down in it. Look around. Ask yourself, if I'm Mr. Big and I've got all these acres to lay down, why am I laying down here? The more you do that, the more not only does it make sense to figure out the property you're hunting, but now you're on new ground. We just look for those same situations all over again. Right. The hinge cutting I do, frankly, is first and foremost food production. I really don't. I hope I don't offend anybody with what I'm going to say here, but a lot of hunters in the Midwest have no clue what a healthy woods looks like for deer browse. Right. And it's because so many of these woodlots have been pastured over the years. And you have and I'm talking the Iowa, Missouri, Illinois belt, where the logging isn't a big deal like it is in Wisconsin, my home state. And we don't have anywhere near the woods that have been cow pastured. So our woods, we've got, just naturally, we tend to have a ridiculous level of browse. You get down to that latitude belt we were just talking about, though, a state lower, and now you're walking through the woods, and what are these deer eating over winter? Mm-hmm. The thing that, frankly, allows them to maintain such a high deer number density is agriculture and them not really having winters. A deer in Iowa oftentimes in mid-February is out picking soybeans off the ground. They don't even have to paw through snow to do that. Right. Same time where Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New York deer, they're trudging through 3 feet of snow to eat the end of a stick. But so the biggest thing that I'm really trying to accomplish with hinge cutting, no matter what I'm using hinge cutting for, is to jack up those browse levels. Even in egg-rich ground. Browse is a very important foodstuff. Especially when you have years like 2012 where it was just such a horrific drought through all the Midwest. If they don't have crops to eat, and you're looking at 150 deer per square mile of habitat, which is pockets of it sure was. I know one of the properties I managed was. Man, you have crop failure, and God help those deer, because they're going to die the most hideous way. Some of them are going to die the most hideous way they possibly can.
Right.
If you've ever been in a traditional yarding area on a bad winter up north, it's just it's sick and brutal.
Yeah, it's so. Would you prioritize then in terms of food plots? Do you prioritize food plots when you're looking at a property, or are you prioritizing looking at places that you can get natural browse and food down to the deer's level? Before we hear how Steve likes to address food on properties, let's take a quick second to hear from our partners at Whitetail Institute of North America with this week's Whitetail Institute Food Plot Tip of the Week. And this week, John shares tips for using both of Whitetail Institute's herbicide products, Slay and Arrest Max, for broadleaf and weed control.
We also have a broadleaf weed herbicide. It's called Slay, and it controls most kinds of broadleaf weeds. One of the neat things about Arrest Max is that it's the newest generation of grass herbicides, has a number of benefits. One is that unlike our earlier grass herbicide, which was just Arrest without Max on the end, you couldn't mix it with tank mix it with Slay. You'd have to spray the Arrest or spray the Slay, and then wait at least 3 days and spray the other one. Arrest Max, though, can be tank mixed with Slay if it's appropriate to spray both on the plot. You can do it in one shot. And also with the Slay broadleaf herbicide, it requires an adjuvant, and an adjuvant is basically just something you put in the spray tank with the herbicide to activate it and or make it stick to the leaves and or help it penetrate. With Slay, you have to add an adjuvant when you tank mix. We have one called Surefire Crop Oil Plus. It's very, very good. It's vegetable based. It's not petroleum based, and it's very inexpensive. And let's say you're mixing the Slay spray tank and you put an Arrest Max in there too. Then when you add the Surefire, it will do double duty. It will satisfy the requirement that Slay have it in the tank, and it will also help the Arrest Max to get an even hotter burn on grasses. Now, there's some other things out there. There's some other very similar herbicides out there, and I see people say sometimes, "Oh, you don't have to add oil with this grass herbicide." Well, I've looked at some of those, and they're a lot like ours, and that says it has some oil in it, and ours does too. So do you have to add an oil or an adjuvant with Arrest Max? No. But we try to give very accurate information, and I'm telling you, if you look at how cheap the oil is, especially if you're dealing with a mature grass or a hard to control grass, add some more oil in there with it. Add the Surefire in there with it. It will increase the burn even more.
And that, folks, is a Whitetail Institute Food Plot Tip of the Week. I've been using the Whitetail herbicide products for a few years now, and my perennial clover plot is in its third year and looks as good as it ever has. If you'd like to learn more about any of the Whitetail Institute products, head over to whitetailinstitute.com, check out their product selector tool, and help you determine which forage or herbicide product will work best for your food plot needs. Now let's get back to the show. Both,
yeah. When I should back up a little bit and really answer your question. I have a bad tendency of getting off on radical tangents and never answering the question.
Hey, tangents are okay here. They're allowed.
But first priority for the hinge cutting is to create browse. My second priority, honestly, is to create visual blocks. You look at those woods that we were just talking about in the Midwest. You don't even have to clear lanes to go sit in the middle of the woods with a shotgun or a rifle in your hand, because you can naturally shoot 100, 200 yards in all sorts of directions. Mm-hmm. That's not good. It's not good because now Mr. Big, if this is your ground and you're trying to manage it, now Mr. Big is coming through checking for does. If you can see 100, 200 yards in every direction, so can he. Right. Okay, so he doesn't have to bird dog that property anywhere near as hard as if, he can only see 30 yards in that direction. He can only see 50 yards in this direction. If he wants to know if there's does there, he's got to go check it out. And then lastly, I do have pretty darn, I'd say over 50% success getting does to bed in hinge cut doe bedding areas. As I said, I can bat 100 or 1,000 if I go ahead and make buck beds where bucks are already bedding. If I try to make them where they're not already bedding, no, I drop down to maybe 0.2%. Right. But it's really the browse production. When it comes to these sidewalks, a sidewalk is nothing more than going ahead and having about a 32-inch wide path through hinge cut, where you hinge cut the trees perpendicular to the trail so the deer can get on and off easy enough, for anywhere from 10 to 30 feet in either direction of the center. It depends on the maturity of the woods. I don't care if deer follow it or not, to be brutally honest with you. It's really what I'm trying to do is create a living hedge through the woods and make it so that a privacy fence and a salad bar. And you want to get deer to follow a sidewalk, it's really easy. Make the sidewalk on a deer trail.
Right. Put it where they already are. It's Occam's razor, right? The simplest answer is typically the most correct answer in many cases.
You're 100% right, Clint. And I'll tell you, when it comes to, I really I get a thrill out of trying to tweak deer behavior. Try to get them to react to me rather than me reacting to them. Right. Hopefully in a positive way.
Right.
But
I've had plenty of the negative.
Yeah, we all have, believe me. But it's always easier to get deer to do what they're already doing more than it ever is to stop them from doing something that they're doing. Right. You have to work so darn hard to stop. Those are the two extremes. It's easier to get them to do what they're already doing more, heck of a lot easier than it is to get them to stop doing something they're doing or get them to do something that they don't traditionally do there. The traditionally do part is the middle ground. Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. It's much more possible than stopping deer from doing something they're already doing.
Right.
But by far your best success, whenever given the option, what I do is I take natural deer movements that are working for my goals. Be it hunting or management. And I try to put that on steroids. The deer activity that is working against my goals, I try to discourage. Right. Such as that trail that jumps the fence, over to the neighbors where you got Mr. Big bedding on your ground and he sets up 10 yards off your line and ends up killing him every year. Not that there's a darn thing that's 100% legal for him to do. 100% legal, and I have absolutely no right to be upset that he's doing that.
Right.
Just like he has no right to be upset that, 10 yards on my side of the property line, I just made a blockade.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that fence line because I actually just put in, my dad picked up a 50-ish acres this past winter, and there's a fence row or an old page wire fence that kind of goes along the one field edge that separates a small field of ours versus the neighboring farm's larger field. And there's an area where they're clearly coming across. So what I did was I went in and did all my killing and did my weed eating, did it all, but the poor man's version with no equipment. And went in and sprayed. And what I did was I snaked a small, what I'll call a kill plot along the timber line there for two reasons. One, I want to pull them close to the timber line so I can possibly get a shot of any of the nice, bucks that are on the property. Two, I wanted to slow them down from getting across the neighbor's fence line until it was after dark. So give them a reason to pause, on our property.
You are hitting on if you're trying, nobody manages free range deer.
Right.
Okay. But if you're trying to manage free range deer on your property, and I'm lucky. Every year I've retired from doing the photo evaluations. I actually trained a couple guys that do them now. Mm-hmm. One's my younger brother, and the other's a longtime assistant. Mm-hmm. But I still do long-term on-site management consultations. I don't know what exactly the right term is for it. I manage clients' properties for 4, 5, 6 years, right, till I get it to the point where we're good. The population dynamics are where they're supposed to be. The habitat's where it's supposed to be right now. This is, frankly, it's an assembly line. You just keep doing what I'm doing, and you're good. Right. Then I'll move on to another property. I've been so unbelievable. And I'm going to pause here just for a second, and talk to your audience. Thank you. What I'm about to tell you, my God, for some stupid kid from northern Wisconsin to be able to do this, my God, thank you. Because I don't do this without your audience. Right. No way. I've managed as big as a 4,000 acre property. Now, I could never buy 4,000. Heck, I couldn't buy 400 acres of ground. Right. Manage. But over the years, I've been able to manage 5, 6 properties that are over 1,000 acres, mm-hmm, in northern and midwestern states. Even on those properties, deer are going to leave. And the only way to stop deer from leaving your property is to erect a high fence. You know, I don't care what any of these people are saying. That is the only way you're going to get them to stop leaving your property, even if you own 4,000 acres. Now, are those ones that are living in the center of that 4,000 going to leave? Probably not much. The does aren't. You know, the right. Does. But Mr. Big, he probably still is going to leave. Mm-hmm. You know, it'll just be a little excursion. Okay, but you know. And that's where what you just said comes into play. So key. I want to waste. My goal when I'm trying to manage here. Now you can't do this on every property. Okay, you need to match your property to its strengths. And you know what? If your neighbor happens to have a 10-acre cedar swamp and a gorgeous oak ridge with beautiful viewing bedding, and all you got is flat 40 acres of timber, guess what? You're not getting those bucks out of that cedar ridge and off that, your mature bucks off that cedar ridge and out of that swamp to bed on your flat 40. Okay, right. But so in that case, you don't want to try to go for that. You do need to try to match your strengths of your property to your goals, frankly. But when you do have, the ideal is have those bucks set up their daylight core area on your ground, their bedding areas. Okay. Now, are they going to jump that fence eventually? Of course they are, but let's get them to waste every flipping second we can on this property before they do. Because I don't care what they're doing after dark. Right. What they're doing after dark is absolutely no concern of mine whatsoever, as long as they stay off the roads when there's headlights coming. And as long as they come back before first light. So, that little staging plot you've got there. We all know that bow hunting mature bucks is a game of minutes, often seconds. Yeah. You know, you're really hunting unless you're dealing with pristinely managed ground, where the deer on there are just plain pants on head stupid compared to real deer, which thankfully I get to experience every year. But unless you're dealing with that 4,000 acres, unless you're dealing with that 2,500 acres, unless you're dealing with that 100 acres that is pristinely managed, all you're really hunting for is that last 5 minutes of shooting light. Mm-hmm. Last 10 minutes on a really good day. You know, will they every once in a while throw you a curveball and show up early? Yeah, and please keep throwing me curveballs. Right. But realistically, we're really hunting. If you're trying to kill mature bucks, and I'm not trying to convince anybody what they should hunt. That's everybody's own choice, and none of us have a right to judge that person for their choice as long as they're hunting legal deer in a legal manner. But those 5 minutes make a big difference. Every single scrape, we can get him to stop to work. That's anywhere from 30 to 120 seconds. So if we can get him to, so on that food plot of yours there now, why don't you go ahead and put out a scrape tree? And make sure that there are licking branches up the wazoo along the edge of that little snake that you got going along that fence line. Because if you can just plain get him to work 2-3 scrapes, he's probably not jumping that fence till after dark.
Right.
And then he happens to catch that neighboring hunter climbing down out of his tree stand.
Right.
He doesn't like that.
No.
He doesn't care for that at all. And that's, if you don't mind me jumping off into a big time tangent here.
Please.
We are really, really good at complaining about our neighbors. You know, we would be able to really do something on this ground if it wasn't for the neighbors. They kill every darn thing that moves. They don't know what the heck they're doing. They're running around their woods at all time of day. They'll go out scouting the day before firearm season opens, if you can believe that. No, not afraid to put up a stand on the third day. Oh man, don't even get me started on that. Those neighbors can be your best friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like hunting. My entire approach to hunting public ground. My entire approach to hunting, any heavily pressured whitetail, find the pockets where we don't go. And they almost always exist. You know, and it's either because it's overlooked, that's right next to the road, and that's only a 2-acre patch of brush. Now, nobody worth their salt is going to be hunting there, and that's why Mr. Big is bedding there. Mm-hmm. Because he does what he's supposed to do. He's dead.
Right.
He's not Mr. Big. Or there's that any type of, for some reason, if we must be allergic to water, because if you can't cross water in rubber boots, if you got to, God help you, if you got to put on hip boots, you're going to lose 95% of the other hunters.
Right.
You know, and if you got to drag out a canoe, you just lost 99% of the other hunters.
Right.
You know, or that some public ground I hunted down in Illinois. It was 2 gut-busting ridges. The ground itself was pummeled, but I'll tell you what, you got over that first ridge, and you had that thing to yourself. Right. What ends up the way mature. There's different ways as well, obviously, but generally the way bucks live to maturity on heavily hunted ground is they find those pockets we don't go, and they spend their daylight there. And they'll move freely within that pocket during daylight because they know they're safe there. But they almost never leave that pocket till after dark. And they get their tail back in there before first light. If they don't, they didn't make it to maturity. Because there's too many of us out there trying to kill them on those heavily pressured grounds. Do that same with your property. When you're surrounded by neighbors that think and act exactly like you do, man, join the club. You know, join that club and run with it. If you're surrounded by neighbors that do not have the same opinions on hunting as you do, turn your property into that pocket. Now, every time that buck busts that neighbor getting out of his stand, every time he's out there running around the day before deer season, every time he's paying no attention to the odor, to where his odors are blowing whatsoever, that can be a beautiful thing for you, as long as the deer feel safe on your ground. That does not mean you cannot hunt the snot out of your property. You sure can. Perception is reality for deer every much as it is for humans. If they do not see you, if they do not smell you, if they do not hear you, you weren't there.
Right.
So if you're going to do, that's one of the biggest things I do with habitat plans. Those types of setups do not occur naturally very often at all. So manufacture them. Really, before a person ever does anything to their habitat, sit down, first get to know it. Get to know your deer, clearly identify your goals. What are some realistic goals that I can accomplish here? And then make a plan before you ever hit the woods. Now, make a thorough plan to tie all this stuff together to create a flow of deer traffic through your property that works for you, not against you. And make it so that you can hunt them out of low-impact stands. Because if the majority of your hunting is out of low-impact stands, then your entire property just became a sanctuary. And when your property is a sanctuary and your neighbors are out there running around the woods doing things completely different than you are, more power to them, buddy. Because all they're doing is spooking deer, and when they spook deer, guess where deer head? To the area within their home range that they feel safe. Make that your property, and you've got a beautiful, beautiful thing working for you. And to go ahead and try to make it so that all this fits, going full circle back to what you were saying, is those little time wasters on your ground are a big deal. The more time that you can get him to waste on your property, the higher the odds are that you're going to be the one who shoots him if he's a buck you want to shoot. If he's a buck that you want to get another year on, you know what? That neighbor on the other side of the fence, he has every right in the world to shoot that buck. Just like you have every right in the world to get him to waste time on your ground during daylight so he's not jumping that fence till after dark.
You made a lot of really good points during that that part of the discussion.
During my lecture,
during your lecture, it was fantastic. There was 3 takeaways that I had from it. I was jotting down as things that I've learned to almost make a bite size. Was number 1, especially if you have folks that are on your property lines, or if you're hunting public ground, or whatever the case might be. And this is just something that I've come to learn. It kind of fits really nicely with what you just had mentioned. Was number 1 is have no ego. I think a lot of guys overlook certain parcels of ground because, as you said, no hunter worth their salt would be caught dead in that spot because it doesn't seem like it's not manly enough or not hunter worthy enough. But a lot of times that's where those big bucks are laying, because just for that reason specifically. So when I hit the deer woods, is number 1 is to drop my ego and look. If
you don't mind me cementing your point there, I'm sitting in my office as I speak right now. This is where my wife lets me keep most of my deer mounts. For some reason, she doesn't want them in every room of the house.
I know, right?
But I almost made an off-color joke. I'm glad I didn't. But I can't see any reason why it wouldn't inspire great things in the bedroom.
Right.
Well, let's just leave it at that.
There you go.
But I get happy every time I look at it.
Exactly.
I can't imagine why other people wouldn't as well. But 3 of the bucks that I'm looking at as we talk came from this exact situation you're talking about, where there's no way in heck I'm going to hunt there. I'm not some stupid kid. Well, that's why. And actually, I did a bunch years ago when I needed writing work. I did a bunch of big buck profiles for different magazines, and you're talking for typical, it had to be a minimum of 185.
Wow.
Non-typical, you were looking at a minimum of 230.
Jeez.
2 things that surprised me by that. One, that about half the bucks, not quite, but amazingly close to half the bucks I did profiles of came from ground that any one of your listeners could have hunted, and you and I as well. The other thing that jumped out at me is, at least half of them were shot by kids and first-time hunters.
I read that, actually, and I was going to make mention of that. And you don't send the kid to your prime hunting spot. You send them to where no one else wants to go, and there's a chance that no one has been there in years because everyone views it as a poor deer density or a poor deer hunting spot.
Or it's that pocket right next to the road that you got to be kidding me.
Yep.
Let's send George there. This is George's first year. He don't know no better.
Right. Or let's send him up on top of that ridge where no one wants to hike to because it's a brutal hike.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So you're 100% right. I'm sorry now. I just wanted to cement your point on that. But have no ego when it comes to this type of stuff, people.
Yeah.
Because that's what costs you chances at deer.
Yeah. No, and that was a good point to kind of cement it. And I'm glad you mentioned that writing the profiling that you did, because I did read that, and it was really kind of opened my eyes. But my second point was to work harder. To go to those places that no one's willing to go over that second ridge or that second knob that's going to take you an extra 40 minutes, because that's going to probably pay dividends. And the third one is, and I always like whenever I hear you talk about this, is to use others' influence. And you don't just do it whenever you're dealing with hunters. I've listened to you and read things that you've written where you talk about using the negative influence of even cameras to position deer in a certain area of a food plot or a field, or to move them in a certain direction, knowing that they're going to have avoidance of a certain camera because of the flash. So it's using those types of things to those negative influencers to your advantage.
Without, as I said, our greatest weapon is our mind. If we use it to its fullest, we can and be creative. We are blessed and cursed today. We're blessed in that. I'll tell you what. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking, Clint?
I'm 39.
39. Okay, you're right at the edge of being able to relate to this. I got 13 years on you. When I was 13 years old, and desperate for any whitetail knowledge I could get my hands on, I'd go down to the Barron, Wisconsin Public Library, and there were 2 books. That was it. On the entire library, on hunting, and one of the 2 was more on ballistics than hunting, and the one that was hunting wasn't very good. But that's beside the point. Today, oh man, anybody who has the internet and a computer has way more information than they could possibly digest, and that is great in that. An underlying theme of most of the writing is a system for hunting bucks. This is how you hunt them early season. This is how you hunt them during the scrape phase. This is how you hunt them during the chase phase. This is how you hunt them during the rut, post-rut, and second rut. Which the second rut is a misnomer. It's really doe fawns, but they're first coming into estrus. This whole idea that the population skewed, so all these does are running around unbred, and nubbin buck can breed a doe. I'm not saying it never happens that a doe goes unbred, but not at any significant level to speak of whatsoever. But that's good, because you should go ahead and cater your hunting tactics to what the bucks want at that time. You do that, it only makes sense, your success is going to go up. But people aren't doing anywhere near the stupid stuff I did when I was a kid, because I didn't know any better. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, it was a magnificently glorious disaster.
Right.
But that 10th time, it actually worked. When there isn't information, people tend to try stuff. They try to figure it out on their own. When there is a bunch of information out there, people think, oh, this is the way you do it, so I'm going to do it. Be creative. Be creative, and you can do so much more. Now, I'm going to say it one more time, and then I'll try not to say it again, because it's got to be getting sickening. But your mind is by far your most powerful weapon. Yeah,
100% agree with that. It's I can relate to that, because it's, even though you might have 13 years on me, I grew up in an area where we didn't have internet or cable. I never had a computer until probably the early 2000s. I don't think that was when I finally got a computer and actually had readily available internet access and so forth. Sure. So there was definitely a lot of those mistakes being made. I used to think, when I was a kid growing up hunting with my dad, it was rifle hunting, and that was kind of what we did. I thought there was really only one good spot on our entire property to hunt, because I was the only one that saw deer every morning, and they were coming running off of a field from being shot at the neighbor. And I would usually get a crack at like 8:30, and if it didn't happen at 8:30, well then my season was pretty much over at that point, because I just didn't understand how to look for the right type of sign and how to scout and stuff like that. It was just learning by trial and error. It's like I jumped more deer than I ever saw walk in my life as a kid growing up.
Well, as a camera guy, a buddy that I went to high school with, I trained him to use a camera because when I first started, these companies that I was pro staffing for were sending professional camera guys out to film me, and I hated that.
Right.
Just drove me nuts. I did it 1 year, and I'm like, no way. And at this point, I wasn't in a position where I could tell these companies no. So I'm like, all right, so how do I solve it? I'll train some friends that actually know how to hunt, how to use cameras. That public ground I was talking about in Illinois, he came down with me. And this was one of our first I think it was his first out-of-state hunt. It was like my second or third. And he's like, Steve, why couldn't we growing up down here? Can you imagine the deer we'd have on our walls? And as I told him, I'm thankful as heck we didn't. I grew up in northern Wisconsin where you saw a doe. You saw a doe 100 yards away while you were out bow hunting. Man, you were the hero of the high school for a month. I mean, you just did that. You just saw a deer, so you had to keep working and working. You either didn't see deer, or you kept working until you figured things out.
Right.
And yeah, the school. I'll tell you what, the School of Hard Knocks is a dang good teacher.
Yeah, it's
for those that listen.
Yeah, yeah, it certainly is, and that was kind of the school, I guess, that I kind of learned from was that approach. But like you said, I wouldn't have it any other way because I grew up hunting. Still live in Pennsylvania, and it's a tough state to hunt. You
learn how to hunt then.
yeah, it's a tough state to hunt. Especially if you're looking for a certain class of deer and stuff like that, and you definitely have to. As you mentioned earlier, you have to kind of make a plan, and you also have to kind of set your expectations for the place that you're hunting. And one of the things that is hurtful, I think sometimes, I'm thankful for a lot of the stuff that the outdoor industry does, in promoting hunting, and so long as it's the correct way and ethically. I think some of the places where it's harmful to a degree, especially whenever you start looking at social media and stuff like that. And I hear and see all these people that are potentially, willing to pass on deer. And I'm not here to tell anybody how they should hunt or what they should hunt, but their expectations for where they live, if I kind of know where they live, especially if they're in Pennsylvania and they're looking at all these wall hangers, these guys are, harvesting on these outdoor shows. And I'm just like, that isn't a realistic level of expectation to really have for the state of PA. Just the state in general. I mean, you do have some decent deer here, but that 150-inch deer in Pennsylvania is few and far between. It's not like you're hunting Ohio or Iowa or Illinois or, any of the big buck states. And, I feel like some people get disappointed, and don't have quite the experience they could have because their expectations have been skewed by what they've seen those in the outdoor industry who have the ability to hunt those types of lands that produce those type of deer. And just kind of gives them, a bad taste in their mouth for their season if they're not harvesting something to that level.
Oh, I couldn't possibly agree more. When you started the first sentence on that, one of the things my mind leapt to, I'm going to have to ask him if he minds if I jump on a soapbox for a second.
Please.
But you did most of it for me, frankly. But I will add this: the worst possible. Well, here, let's put it this way instead. The very best hunters I know, all of them, none of them are in the industry. Absolutely none.
Right.
The next, I don't know how deep I should get into this, but the industry really, these TV shows, and this is not a bash on them, they have pressure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would not. I am thankful as heck. The only TV stuff I do is with Deer and Deer Hunting TV, the magazine's television show, and for some reason, I don't have to kill a thing. All I have to do is talk.
Right.
That's great. I love that. Okay, you couldn't get me to be a member of a real TV show. A shoot 'em up TV show. Deer hunting is not a shoot 'em up show. It's more of an educational thing. Is why they let me get away with that. But the pressure these hunters are under to kill is intense. Mm-hmm. And what do? No, I'm not saying there aren't any exceptions or anything like that, because of course they are. But the overwhelming majority do nothing but go from guided hunt to guided hunt to guided hunt to guided hunt to guided hunt. And I know back when I was consulting for outfitters, it sure would be interesting to listen to their wrap-up interviews after the hunt. Here the night before, the outfitter himself left this little 2-acre alfalfa field plot 100% alone all the way up to the rut because Billy Bob's coming in. Billy Bob and Billy Bob Hunting TV, they're going to be here on November 4th. Okay, so we're running cameras back there. There's this 160-inch buck who's coming out pretty darn regularly. Billy Bob and his crew shows up the night before. The outfitter shows him pictures of the buck he's going to set him up on, and takes him out to the stand the next morning, climbs in it, and then the buck ends up coming through and the guy kills it and talks about how he just patterned this deer and how they've been studying and all this junk. It's TV is entertainment.
Right.
The overwhelming majority of hunting TV shows are pure 100% entertainment. And you are 100% correct. The worst possible way there is to judge a hunter's quote-unquote skill levels is by the amount of inches he has on the wall.
Right.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, I got a whole bunch of inches, and it doesn't mean squat.
Right.
Because 50%, I can jump up on a soapbox, stick my chest out, and proudly proclaim that every deer I have ever shot has come out of a stand that I've scouted, and myself and all this stuff. And, I spend 50% of every hunting season hunting public ground or public and or ground that virtually anybody can go to. A lot of it's private, just enrolled in certain programs. And, oh, man, I do that. I'm down there in the trenches with you. And the other 50% is just stupid. It is so much easier to kill a mature buck when there's 10 mature bucks running around on your property versus one that once or twice might come through.
Right. Yeah.
And those 10 mature bucks are pants on head stupid because they have no idea what hunting pressure is. Right. It's really, really easy for me to look smart there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really easy. And every year I hunt those other grounds, I get my share of humble pie.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I there was a point in time where I used to enjoy just the entertainment of those shows, and then I kind of it waned for me. There is one I've kind of leaned now more toward watching those who are doing what I'll call hunting online web shows. Because I feel them to be a lot more genuine. I'm not sure. It's actually a fellow badger, if you will. This fella, his name's Curtis Zabel. He has a show called Behind the Bow, and I think you would really like him if you haven't heard of him already. He's a young guy. He's like 26 years old, and it's all public land, and he is just a grinder and captures everything that he's doing, on public land, from doing what you're talking about, using like hip boots, wading across rivers and canoes. That's just his mentality. And I really enjoy watching his because he shows you every success, every failure, and there's no he shoots a deer in Missouri and it wasn't like a 160-inch deer, but man, he put in some work for that deer, and it might as well have been 220 inches, as happy as he was with that deer. And those are the things I think I lean toward more, those types of shows, because I think there's less pressure, and not less pressure on the deer, but less pressure on the person hunting, so you actually see the honest hunt. And the caliber of deer they're after, sure, they'd like to shoot a nice buck, but for them it's really about matching wits with a nice cagey veteran of the whitetail woods, if you will, going after mature deer versus inches, which is nice.
Well, going back to what you said earlier, when we first started talking about how yeah, we might end up talking about some of the stuff that's going on. That's why this stuff goes on.
Yeah.
For those regular hunting shows, I'll never forget. Years ago, Pat Reeve and I were really good friends. And he had just started North America. He was the one who actually pushed North American Whitetail to have a TV show. And it was his first year in, and here it is. Here it is, October 1st. And he's a mess. He's a mess because he's only killed 3 bucks so far this year.
Wow.
By October 1st. Yeah, only 3. And I'm like, Pat, you got all, it hasn't even got good yet. Yeah, but yeah, I guess I can't really get into much detail. He wasn't impressed with his team at the time, in what they were getting done. So it's all on me, and I've got to kill. What was it? Like, he thought in his head that he had to kill 26 bucks in a season, for God's sakes.
Wow, man, I can't even fathom that number.
And so that's incredible pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky because one thing that when you ask how I got into this, what I failed to mention is first 7-8 years I had a day job.
Right.
I was getting up at 6 o'clock to go to work, get home around 5:30, spend till 8-9 o'clock with the short people running around the house and the ex-wife, and then right until 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
And get up at 6 and go to work to do the same for 8 years. I'm sure some people are not going to think I'm exaggerating, but for 8 years, I bet you there wasn't a grand total of 2 weeks time of weekdays that I didn't get up at 6 and end up staying up until 2 o'clock at night writing.
Yep.
I did that because I somehow was accidentally smart enough to realize that I don't want that career.
Right.
The career I've got a good day job. I wasn't rich by any means, but a good day job for the area. I'm not giving up that security blanket unless this is exactly what I want.
Right.
And that type of pressure, oh man, it makes people do really, really, really incredibly stupid things. Not everybody, but yeah, please don't take this wrong. I think that you knowingly make a game violation, your career better be done.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I definitely have some, sympathy for someone who's going to a different, I shouldn't say sympathy, but I can understand if you're going to another state and hunting and you've brushed up on the game laws in that state and you've made an honest mistake and you report it when you should report it, and you own it. That's someone I can look at and say, hey, it's, everyone has a mistake, and it's like, and that's understandable. But for what I understand, the gentleman that had a, quote unquote mistake in the past, couple weeks, it wasn't his first rodeo as far as game violations were concerned. And just, it seemed as though the evidence that alleged that he was, did something, on video, just seemed a little bit damning.
When you tell the camera guy, we're going to have to assuming this is true.
Right.
I just read the article from the local paper for where this occurred. If you turn and tell the camera guy on tape, we've got to get rid of that elk kill.
Right.
Ignorance is, I know ignorance isn't a defense to begin with, but you just threw even the benefit of the doubt out the window there.
Right. Yeah.
When you tell the cameraman on tape, we broke the law, and now we've got to cover it up, kind of hard to pretend you didn't know.
Yeah, it's
but honest mistakes. We're all human. Heck, I'm as far from perfect as can be. And if you don't believe me, I can wake up the wife, and she'll be more than happy to tell you.
I hear you.
But yeah, knowingly, as I said, I'm not please don't take this as me making an excuse for these guys, because frankly, it's not. But that is human nature. You put unbelievable amounts of pressure on people, they tend to do the weaker ones tend to do stupid things.
Yeah, and they all sign up for it, so they have to they own it, But you're 100% correct. It's like pressure will do interesting things to humans. But I want to be sensitive to your time here, Steve. And I do have one more question that I absolutely wanted to get to with you today, because it was something I found extremely interesting. And we're going to just shift gears here a little bit. I want to get into hunting, bucks during the rut specifically, or pre-rut into rut, I guess you could say. Because I was reading your Big Buck Secret book. It actually helped me get through a snow delay while I was in Orlando on vacation this past year. It snowed and I had to stay for an extra day, so I sat poolside and was able to catch up on some reading, which was good. And
cool.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned in there that I thought was really, really interesting, because as I was reading this section of the book, I was thinking of a couple of the properties that I hunt and how I can kind of better position myself on the property to have better sightings or more frequent sightings during pre-rut and rut. And you mentioned something about using dominant doe families versus low-end doe families during different phases of breeding, and you'll kind of use that kind of, I guess, criteria to determine who the dominant doe family is, and then how they all kind of, I guess, stack in succession chronologically, and that how the bucks are going to follow those dominant doe families in succession based on when they cycle in for breeding. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you use that to position yourself in terms of stands and so forth? Certainly.
And to start off, I've got to say right up front that this is not going to apply for everyone. It flat out will not. What you're looking at, where this works the best by far, is on properties that have way too many deer, to the point where the habitat itself just cannot support them at a healthy level. I'm not saying that deer are dropping over dead of starvation all over, but they're nowhere near as healthy as they could be, because when you have too many deer on a property, what they do is they literally wipe out their preferred food sources. So then they start working on their secondary food sources and their tertiary food sources, and just keep going on down the line to the point where next thing you know, they're eating stuff that's starvation food. In situations like that, where these deer, they're under some stress. We do not give social stress anywhere near the credit it deserves when it comes to the whitetail world. Social stress is a big deal. But in those specific situations, you're dominant. Just like when it comes to, we were talking about bedding before. I could, without even thinking, probably list just 30, 40, 50 different spots where I am supremely confident that there's a mature buck bedding there. Why? Because it's the best bedding spot in the area. And yeah, the mature buck that was bedding there when I found it, he's long dead. But guess what? It's the best bedding spot in the area. Therefore, your dominant buck, or one of them, is going to be bedded there every stinking year. It's applying that same premise to this now. Okay, when your dominant groups take the very best, like that buck bedding area, okay, the family groups take what they see as the best doe bedding area. They frequent the best food source. They frequent the best water source, the best of everything. Okay, because they are the dominant group. Family groups, they consist of typically a matriarch doe and a bunch of her daughters and a bunch of her granddaughters and a bunch of her great-great-grandchildren, even including their year-and-a-half-old bucks up until the rut sometimes. There's a hierarchy between them very similar to within the buck world. Okay? That alpha doe that's got a nasty attitude and has got an army of relatives behind her, she's going to take the best of everything. And if food sources are limited, the second she comes out to that food source, her group's going to 8 times out of 10 drive all the other deer off the darn thing. Because this is mine. Okay. So then your secondary group tends to take the second best stuff on down the line. You get down in an overpopulated habitat that just does not pump out the nutrition anymore for the number of deer on it, you get down to those low-end groups and life stinks. They got the worst of everything. Okay. Sure, they'll have plenty of cover and food right this time of year. But now what happens when all those weeds and grasses out in the timber start to die? Life gets tough. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is we touched on the second rut a little bit earlier. That's actually the other part. The other part is that, first off, I know this is getting way too darn complicated to follow all of it, but first off, your healthiest does tend to come in estrus first. Mm-hmm. Every scientific study I have ever seen flat out states that this whole idea that the moon has anything to do with breeding is a bunch of baloney. They'll do fetus studies on roadkill does, and guess what? The moon is different for 5 years in a row, but yet the majority of them backdate to the exact same time.
Right.
It's for Midwestern and Northern deer. It's based on the photo period. You drop a fawn too early, you could drop it in the snow and it could die. You drop it too late, it doesn't have a chance to grow enough to survive the first winter. Mother Nature is a very cruel yet effective dictator. So your healthiest does tend to come in estrus first. Your least healthy tend to come in last. All right, so now let's go ahead and try to put all this stuff together. Now, your dominant family groups have the best of everything. Well, they better be the healthiest then, shouldn't they? Mm-hmm. So they're probably going to have the first does to come into estrus. Okay. So when I want to go ahead and set up on if we've got a good weather front coming through, by good weather front I mean it's been in the 50s for the last 4, 5, 6 days, and all of a sudden, ooh, sookie, it's going to be in the low 40s tomorrow. That's a great deer, as long as there aren't howling winds with it or intense storms. That's a great deer weather movement day. You can all but guarantee that those bucks are going to be up on their feet earlier. They're going to be feeling their oats a little bit. Now, this might be a really good day to set up on a doe bedding area, because even though we sit there and say that the rut in Wisconsin, my area, Wisconsin, the peak breeding phase every year starts around the 6th or the 7th, goes through about the 15th. That's when the majority of does get bred in my specific pocket. But does are bred before and after. Okay, and then they don't all fit in this neat little window. So on October 20th, I got that weather front coming through. This might not be a bad day to go out and hunt a doe bedding area. I'm going to hunt the dominant doe bedding area, the downwind side, because that has the highest odds of actually having a doe in estrus. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean there will be one, but it has the highest odds. And these bucks that are now 3.5, 4.5 years old, some of them have figured that out. Mm-hmm. They know their home range. They know their home range intimately. Okay, and they know all the family groups on their home range and all this good stuff. Where they tend to be, all that type of stuff. And let's pretend that this is a buck that doesn't even know anything about this. But he smells an attractive odor. He's going to go check it out. So early season, what I do, the earliest quote unquote rut hunts I do are on the downwind side of dominant family group bedding areas, because they offer the highest odds of actually attracting Mr. Big. Now once you get into the peak breeding phase itself, I mean, we're like, let's say, use Wisconsin dates for my pocket, it's November 10th. November 10th, I'm going to be hunting virtually any doe group there is out there outside of that most subordinate doe group, because they are the ones that are most nutritionally stressed. Therefore, they should be the unhealthiest. Therefore, they should be coming into estrus last. Now you get to the 16th, this is a day after the peak now. Now all of a sudden that subordinate doe bedding area looks attractive, because their does should be starting to come in now. And then now you get all the way to December. I want to be hunting those dominant family groups again, because how do their fawns achieve estrus? Doe fawns achieve estrus by hitting certain physical and physiological thresholds. They have to grow up to a point, both physically and physiologically, because your dominant doe groups the dominant does within them tend to get bred first. They tend to be dropping their fawns first, and assuming they survived fine, they tend to be the healthiest, and they're the ones that end up, generally speaking, come into estrus that first year. At least that first year. So that's how I end up trying to take advantage of that for, the quote-unquote second rut. It really, I know I promised earlier that I wouldn't do this again, but it really all comes back to that same thing that I said. Our most powerful weapon is our mind. You cannot, if you really want to take your game to the next level, do what I said about questioning sign. Question it. Don't just find it. Try to understand as much as you can about it, and understand as much as you can about deer. The more you do, the more all of a sudden, if you think analytically and think creatively, you can come up with stuff. I mean, quite honestly, that's one of the few things that I think I came up with myself. I went ahead and tried to spent about 10 years after I came up with it to try to prove it wrong.
Right.
And wasn't able to. Now, as I said, this is not going to work for every single hunter out there. Heck, it's not even going to work for probably much more than 25% of them. No, you need the high deer population numbers, and you need to learn your doe groups. And learning your doe groups isn't anywhere near as complicated as it seems. You're sitting on that food plot. You watch that doe group come out. Oh, here comes the second doe group. Who avoids who?
Right.
The subordinate one's going to avoid the more dominant one. Okay, if one of them gets chased off, guess what? The one doing the chasing is more dominant than the one doing the running.
Right.
Keep it simple, stupid. None of this stuff is rocket science.
Right.
Absolutely none of it is. We're dealing, and don't take this wrong, I respect deer more than I do most people, but we're dealing with dumb animals.
Right.
That's all they are, is dumb animals that give us a tremendous amount of pleasure.
Yeah. 100% agree. I try to take the approach where I try not to overthink things. It's like I've gotten into those situations. I think we probably all have as bow hunters specifically, because of the close quarters that you have to kind of get into. Yep. But I've gotten into situations where I've had, paralysis by analysis, where I've overanalyzed so much, so thoroughly that I could not make a decision because I was really to the point of splitting hairs. So now it's like I usually just try to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and kind of make my plan from that perspective, and just use my instinct, my hunter instinct a little bit more, trust my gut a little bit more, and certainly trust my eyes. That's the one thing I think that we sometimes get so wrapped up into our own brains over it that we forget to trust the things that man had long before we had any technology that they had to use to survive, and they did just well by it.
Oh, I agree completely, especially when it comes to trusting your gut. I mean, any time my gut's telling me to do something really, is screaming, I'm not saying I got, I'm trying to preface this in a way because I could see this being used really easy for, I killed a buck in that high impact stand in the middle of my property last year, so I got a feeling I'm going to kill him there today. No, you want to go there because you killed a buck there once.
Right.
And it's probably not a good idea to trash your entire property on opening day.
Right.
Okay. But when I've got an honest to God strong gut feeling, the only time The only time I'm disappointed is when I don't listen.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Trust your instincts. I mean, when your instincts are sincerely trying to tell you something, I personally believe it's your subconscious, but
right.
But when it's trying to listen.
It's I just use that same rule of thumb when I'm at home with my wife. I'd be a lot further ahead in life, most likely, but that's probably a topic for a different podcast. But Steve, I do want to be sensitive to your time. I do appreciate you spending over an hour and a half with us here today talking deer hunting. It's been a pleasure for me. I've been looking forward to having you on for a long time. But before I let you go, if you wouldn't mind, just let the folks out there listening know where they can find out more information about you and your work.
Well, if you ever want to read any articles, deer and deer hunting, buckmasters, North American whitetail. I don't know if I'm in every one of them, but every issue of every one, but pretty close. I do 2 different web series that are 100% free. They both run on Deer and Deer Hunting's Facebook account and on their homepage and YouTube as well. One of them is Growing Big. That's an every other week show on habitat improvement and deer management. They're just little 4 or 5 minute shows. What I do is I film myself while I'm out working. And this is what I do. I'm not telling anybody that they should do this themselves or all I'm doing is sharing, this is what I do, these are the mistakes I've made, these are my victories. And just try to take an individual topic that I'm working on at that time and cover that. That runs every other week year round, and then I do a Hunt 'em Big show, web show that, again, for deer and deer hunting, again, just 4 or 5 minute episodes on hunting tips that run every other week during season. And on my own Facebook account, that's just Facebook/Steve Bartylla. I'm starting to. I'm actually should have listened to the wife on this one. She's been pushing me to do this for 12 years already, telling me that I'm not smart by not doing it. But I have recently started putting a bunch of stuff up on Facebook. Mm-hmm. I'm still hashing out the exact sequence of what I'm going to put out there, but any of the books you can get off of Amazon's the cheapest, or food-plots-for-deer.com. You can buy them off of there as well. That was the site I helped create years ago for photo evaluations, and I sold it, but they're still selling the books there. And if somebody wants one, the guys doing it, I trained myself. They are really good. Right. I don't know. Oh, and Deer Hunting TV, I think they moved it to the Pursuit channel. I'll be honest with you, when you were talking TV earlier, I can't remember the last TV show I watched.
I'm in the same boat. I cut the cable a while ago, and it's all internet and streaming for me. I find I get more work done that way. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm just not the type of person who can sit and watch a lot of TV to begin with.
Yeah.
But I don't watch hunting TV for pretty much what you already said.
Right. But hey, so for everyone out there listening, I will say, I've of course, as I mentioned, I've followed you across the multitude of mediums and always find it, enjoyable, number one. Number two, very informational. A lot of the changes I've made to my habitat approach on both of our family farms and how I approach hunting has definitely been influenced by things I've picked up from Steve. So I urge everyone to kind of either pick up a book, check out all the different video stuff that he's doing. His Facebook page, always great tips there every week. Even if you only have a few quick minutes over lunch, during the course of a week, it's a great place to go to get some quick information that's free. And Steve, before I let you go, I will offer my services for an intro if you ever should need one for a speaking engagement. I'm available for you, my friend.
I was sitting there listening to you thinking, dang, I'm good.
All right, sir. Well, I do appreciate your time. You have a good rest of your afternoon, and I hope to be talking to you again soon.
I'd love to do it again, and I just want to wrap up by thanking you for having me on and your audience. I mean, I know this sounds incredibly cheesy, but man, I can't possibly mean it more sincerely. I don't do what I'm doing if it isn't for the people supporting my work. And man, that's a debt that I can never repay.
Well, we thank you for what you help us with as well. So it's reciprocated, I'm sure.
There we go.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I want to thank Steve for joining us and sharing a ton of awesome information. Be sure to follow him on his Facebook page. Steve does a weekly tip on his Facebook page. There's like a mini lecture on deer behavior, habitat management, and everything in between, so you definitely want to check that out. Also, you can find him on deeranddeerhunting.com, where he does a webisode or an internet TV or an internet video show, and as you can also find his writings in the Deer and Deer Hunting magazine, as well as a multitude of other places. And be sure to check out any of the books that Steve has written. Also, want to thank all of you for tuning in and giving me part of your day. Be sure to hit the iTunes subscribe button so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. And if you feel so inclined and are enjoying the show, please leave us a 5-star iTunes rating. We would be very much appreciative of that. Also, you might want to follow along with the Truth from the Stand Instagram page and Facebook pages if you haven't already done that. And if you'd like to get involved in the show or have us, John and I, or a guest, answer your questions, or just would like to recommend a topic for us to discuss or tackle, email me those suggestions at truthfromthestand@gmail.com, or click the email button on our Instagram account and leave us a note. And finally, I need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to make this podcast possible: Whitetail Institute of North America, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Lone Wolf Portable Tree Stands. And until next time, we'll see y'all.